In June 1997, what should have been an ordinary late shift at a small gas station in Etowah County, Alabama, turned into a nightmare for 33-year-old Margaret Parrish Berry. She was a hard-working mother of 3, just hours away from seeing her kids again, when a young man walked through the door with a gun. He wasn't there by chance. He came because he needed money for drugs. What followed was as senseless as it was brutal. A robbery for less than $250, a terrified clerk begging for her life, and a single gunshot that ended it all. But this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. The shooter made sure there would be no witnesses. That man was Geoffrey Todd West, just 21 years old, addicted, desperate, and willing to kill to feed his habit. His girlfriend would later testify against him, sealing his fate and sending him to Alabama's death row. And nearly 3 decades later, after endless appeals and his controversial choice of execution by nitrogen gas, West finally faced the ultimate consequence. To understand how a drug-fueled night of desperation turned into one of Alabama's most haunting capital murder cases, and how the victim's own son shocked the state by forgiving her killer, we have to go back to where it all began. Geoffrey Todd West was born around 1976 in Alabama, growing up in the rural South where opportunity was scarce and trouble was never far away. Those who knew him as a boy remembered him as restless, always moving, always pushing boundaries. By his teenage years, West had already begun racking up a reputation with local law enforcement, petty thefts, fights, and run-ins that hinted at a storm brewing beneath the surface. He dropped out of school young, drifted between odd jobs, and by his early 20s was deep into a dangerous cycle of drug use and crime. Methamphetamine and other narcotics became his escape, and with each high came more risk, more desperation, and more willingness to cross the line. In the months before the crime, West was in a relationship with a young woman who would later become the key witness against him. Their romance was troubled, fueled by drugs, money problems, and late-night schemes. Together, they lived day to day, chasing the next fix, hustling to make a few dollars, and pulling each other further down a dark path neither seemed able to escape. Psychologists and criminologists often describe this type of offender as impulsive, reckless, and detached from the long-term consequences of their choices, and Geoffrey Todd West fit that description all too well. He was young, volatile, and desperate, the kind of man who could talk himself into believing a robbery was just a quick way to solve his problems. But to truly understand the impact of what happened that night, we have to know the woman whose life he took. Margaret Parrish Berry was 33 years old, a loving mother of 3 sons, and the heart of her small community. By all accounts, Margaret was the kind of person who made others feel welcome the moment they stepped into the store where she worked. She smiled easily, remembered her customers by name, and took pride in providing for her family through honest work. Her friends and family describe her as devoted, resilient, and full of life. Someone who faced the daily struggles of single motherhood but never let them dim her warmth. She worked the late shift to make ends meet, knowing her boys were counting on her. On the night of June, Margaret had no way of knowing that her dedication to her job and her family would place her in the path of a man whose desperation had turned deadly. In this story we see 2 very different lives. One spiraling toward chaos, the other striving for stability, colliding in a moment of violence that would change a community forever. In the late hours of March 27, 1997, or the early morning of March 28, according to some records, Geoffrey Todd West and his girlfriend drove to Harold's Chevron, a small convenience gas station on Nicalola Parkway in Etowah County, Alabama, under cover of darkness and with a chilling intent. According to the trial court's sentencing order, West came with a .25 caliber handgun in his hand and a plan to leave no witnesses. The station that night was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights and the tick of a clock among the few sounds in the empty store, and with Margaret Parrish Berry working alone behind the counter, the scene was vulnerable, isolated, and unsuspecting. As West entered, gun drawn, he ordered Margaret at gunpoint to hand over whatever cash she had, directing her to a cookie tin on the counter that held the store's money, and she complied, turning over approximately $250 in small bills from the tin. But once the money was in his hands, West coldly made a decision. He raised the .25 caliber handgun and fired a single shot at the back of Margaret's head, execution style, while she was lying prone behind the counter, a strike intended to silence her forever. Medical testimony in the trial record confirms that the wound would have caused rapid incapacitation and a very swift death. No surveillance video evidence, publicly disclosed, is documented in the case record, but the testimony of the accomplice, West's girlfriend, and other investigative findings were central to establishing exactly how the crime unfolded and linking West to the shooting. When law enforcement officers arrived at the station minutes later, they found Margaret lifeless behind the counter, the store silent, the horror of the crime scene sinking in immediately, and within hours the community was reeling from the news that a mother had been gunned down in her workplace. The investigation into Margaret Snyder's cold-blooded murder began almost immediately after the discovery of her body, with the Etowah County Sheriff's Office locking down the rural gas station and methodically collecting evidence under the harsh fluorescent lights, focusing on the crime scene where the cookie tin had been emptied and where the single fatal shot from Geoffrey West's .25 caliber Raven Arms pistol had been fired, leaving behind a shell casing that would later prove crucial in the case. Detectives quickly pieced together surveillance footage and local tips, learning that West and his girlfriend had been seen near the gas station shortly before the murder, and within days they brought the pair in for questioning, which led to West's girlfriend flipping on him in exchange for a 35-year plea deal, telling investigators how the robbery had been planned, how West had insisted on taking the money, and how he had coldly shot Margaret in the head to keep her from ever testifying against him. Forensic analysis backed up her testimony. Ballistics matched the bullet recovered from Margaret's body to West's pistol, fingerprints on the cookie tin linked him to the cache, and witness statements placed his vehicle at the scene just before the murder. With the evidence piling up and facing overwhelming proof, West eventually gave a partial confession, admitting to being present and pulling the trigger but attempting to downplay his intent as anything but premeditated. When the case went to trial, prosecutors painted the killing as a calculated and deliberate act of silencing a witness, describing West as a cold, remorseless killer who executed a defenseless woman for just $250, while the defense tried to humanize him, emphasizing his youth, his troubled background, and the claim that he had been heavily influenced by his girlfriend, attempting to persuade the jury that this was an impulsive crime, not a carefully plotted execution. After emotional testimony from Margaret's family and graphic forensic evidence showing the trajectory of the bullet, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict of capital murder, recommending by a wide margin that West receive the death penalty, a recommendation that the judge formally adopted when he sentenced West to die by lethal injection, a method that was later changed to nitrogen hypoxia following Alabama's 2018 legislation allowing condemned inmates to choose an alternative method. The appellate process dragged on for years, with West's defense raising issues about the girlfriend's credibility and whether the trial court had erred in its jury instructions. But in 2000, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals in West v. State upheld the conviction and death sentence, closing the door on most legal challenges and solidifying West's place on death row until his eventual execution date was set. After being sentenced to death, Geoffrey West was transferred to Holman Correctional Facility, Alabama's notorious death row, where he would spend more than 2 decades confined to a small, windowless cell for 23 hours a day, living in the tense, monotonous cycle of death row life while fighting for his life through years of appeals, post-conviction petitions and federal habeas corpus challenges. His legal team raised numerous arguments over the years, claiming that errors had been made during the sentencing phase, that the trial court's sentencing order had to be corrected to comply with state law, and that West had been denied effective assistance of counsel. But time and time again the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and federal courts upheld his conviction and sentence, affirming that the evidence of a calculated, witness-silencing murder was overwhelming. During these years, West saw the state of Alabama's death penalty system evolve around him, with the legislature in 2018 passing a law allowing death row inmates to choose nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative execution method to lethal injection, which was facing increasing scrutiny due to botched executions and legal challenges over the use of midazolam as a sedative. West, like several other inmates, filed paperwork opting for nitrogen hypoxia, a method never before used in the United States, which involves placing a mask over the inmate's face and replacing breathable air with pure nitrogen gas, causing death by lack of oxygen. The choice of nitrogen hypoxia became one of the most controversial aspects of his final years, especially after Alabama carried out the nation's first-ever nitrogen hypoxia execution in January 2024 on inmate Kenneth Smith, an event that made international headlines because witnesses reported that Smith appeared to convulse and struggle for several minutes before going still, raising fierce debate over whether the method was humane or constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Despite calls from advocacy groups and legal experts to halt future executions until the process could be reviewed, Alabama officials insisted the method was constitutional and humane, paving the way for West's own execution to be scheduled under the same procedure, setting the stage for one of the most closely watched executions in the state's modern history. In the years after Margaret Parrish Berry's murder, her eldest son, Will Berry, grew up carrying the pain of losing his mother at just 11 years old, a wound that shaped his teenage years and early adulthood until he found strength through faith and a spiritual awakening that led him on a path of forgiveness, not vengeance. As an adult, Will reached out to Geoffrey West on death row, beginning a series of letters in which West expressed deep remorse, admitted his guilt without excuses, and humbly asked for forgiveness for taking Margaret's life. Those exchanges became a powerful turning point, with Will publicly stating that he no longer wanted West to be executed and instead pleaded with Alabama Governor Kay Ivey to commute his sentence to life without parole, arguing that sparing West's life would honor his mother's memory more than another death would. Governor Ivey responded by acknowledging the Berry family's extraordinary compassion but stated that the state had a duty to carry out the lawful sentence imposed by the jury, leaving Will and his family heartbroken but still committed to their decision to forgive West, creating a moving emotional conflict between the grace of forgiveness and the firm hand of justice. After more than 25 years of legal battles, Geoffrey Todd West's final appeals were exhausted in the summer of 2025, with the U.S. Supreme Court declining to intervene, and the Alabama Supreme Court setting his execution date for September 25, 2025, today, making this one of the most anticipated executions in Alabama in recent memory. In the days leading up to his death, West remained housed at Holman Correctional Facility's death row unit until he was moved to the execution holding cell, where he spent his last 48 hours under constant observation, visited by spiritual advisors, and offered the opportunity to record a final statement. Under Alabama law, a 30-hour execution window began at midnight, giving the state authority to carry out the sentence any time during that period, and prison officials prepared the nitrogen hypoxia equipment, a tight-fitting mask connected to a tank of pure nitrogen gas, designed to replace all breathable air with nitrogen, causing unconsciousness within seconds and death within minutes. Witnesses and journalists are expected to gather today in the prison media room, where they will observe through a glass window as West is strapped to a gurney, fitted with the nitrogen mask, and given the chance to speak his last words before the warden gives the signal to start the flow of gas. Nitrogen hypoxia, still a controversial execution method after the first use earlier this year on Kenneth Smith, is expected to cause West to lose consciousness quickly, though there remains public debate over how humane the process truly is, as witnesses in Smith's case reported several minutes of convulsions and heavy breathing before death was pronounced. For the Berry family who have waited nearly 3 decades for justice, today marks both an end and a painful reminder of their loss, while for West supporters and those moved by Will Berry's forgiveness, it is a solemn moment of reflection about mercy, justice, and the ultimate price of one night's terrible decision. And so, the story of Geoffrey Todd West comes to an end. A life that spiraled out of control, a crime that shattered a family, and a justice system that spent nearly 3 decades working toward this moment. But forgiveness and justice don't always walk hand in hand, and Will Berry's plea for mercy has left many wondering if the state should have chosen life instead of death. What do you think? Should Geoffrey West have been spared after showing remorse? Or was this execution the only way to honor Margaret Parrish Berry's memory and give her family the closure they deserve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with others who follow true crime stories, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dive documentaries on the most haunting cases of justice, redemption, and tragedy. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.